the human ability to create and think and innovate, we're all super dope, right? We all are. We all have it.
Welcome to Inside Science Conversations. I'm your host, Chris Gorski. I'm the senior editor at InsideScience.org, a science news website published by the American Institute of Physics. This is a show where I talk to scientists and doctors and experts of all kinds about what drives them and what makes them tick and why they do what they do. For this episode of Inside Science Conversations, we'd like to welcome Dr. Hakeem Oluseyi, an astrophysicist, a professor at George Mason University, and the president of the National Society of Black Physicists. Hakeem, thanks for joining me.
Thanks, Chris. I'm happy to be here.
I contacted you because I read your book. It's really an interesting story about your formative years, your early career. So the first question I want to ask is, do you have a sense of how you became the person who wanted to read everything, memorize everything, learn everything there was about Einstein? Where did that come from?
Yeah, that's a good question because I asked myself the same question. And there's two influences, right? One was the fact that my mother was an avid reader, right? She didn't have an identity of I'm intellectual or anything like that. She just loved to read books, right? And the other thing is another coincidence. My mother's best friend had a son who was 2 years older than me. His name is Darren Brown. And Darren Brown was into reading as well. And also our parents both did. They loved to play these Dale crossword puzzle books, but there would be more than crosswords in there. They were only interested in the crosswords. So Darren and I would do the crisscross, the logic problems, and sometimes, of course, most of the time I was doing it alone. But we were together a lot. So the thing is, Darren grew up to be a Navy officer and was like the second highest ranked African-American in the Navy submarine fleet. At the time of 9/11, I think he was on the XO tour, and then he came up for captain. There was no ship available, so he ran the Navy base at Ames in San Jose, California. So those people, my mother being an avid reader and Darren being an avid reader, was sort of like my nerd influences that drew me into books. But I think a third part of it was just trauma. Okay, so the time when I really fell in love with books, I was 9 years old. And by that time, I had figured out that humans can be somewhat dangerous, right? And, as a species, right, we're a social species and we bond. And I bonded with books instead of, humans so much. I tend to avoid humans and read a lot.
So what kind of shape did that take? Was it just anything you could see you were getting into, or did you go towards science and encyclopedias and stuff? How'd you get there?
I was interested in the natural world and stuff that's weird. So one of the stories I tell in the book is at a certain point, Darren informs me that if you're under 18 years old, you can't be held to a contract. So I started ordering Time Life books, right? They have those. And what's funny is, I've recently published with Time Life books. I told them the story, but, I ordered these books. I was into Bigfoot, the Loch Ness Monster, all this stuff. And I love comics, Marvel, DC Comics, who I learned from my cousins in Mississippi. They had crates and crates of comics. So I would just go there. And of course, my mother had my sister and me going to church every Sunday, right? And so there, you have the Bible stories. So everything that was fantastical just captured my imagination. But the other thing about my home life was, I was in that era of, children are meant to be seen and not heard, basically get outside, don't come in until it's dark, right? If you need a drink of water, get it out the water hose. So, I was left alone a lot. And, sometimes, we lived with a lot of other families, and I ended up living with other families by myself. But there were times where it was just my mother and me. And I was pretty much left alone a lot because she had to work. And, a little kid by yourself, you're going to get into something, right? And so, I started mixing chemicals at home. And, I remember I made a reaction where, it was a liquid and then there was a precipitate form. and it changed colors and went nearly clear. And I was like, oh my goodness, what happened? And I realized that, oh, maybe I should take notes. So I just made my little lab notebook, never even hearing the concept, right? But I just needed to know, how did I do that, right? And so another thing I did was I was trying to do an experiment growing up. And, the year before I was in rural Mississippi, we burnt our trash, people hunted, made their own shotgun shells. It was straight dirt road off of dirt road off of dirt road, deep country. I got into playing with fire. Okay. So yeah, kerosene, we would do a lot of stuff involving oil. Like there was stuff you would do, like, for example, when you castrated baby pigs, you would use dirty oil. You wouldn't put an antibiotic on, you would put dirty oil on. So you were always getting your hands dirty and oily, right? So we would use gasoline to wash our hands of the oil. We would use kerosene in kerosene lamps, right? We would use, right? So so anyway, the experiment I decided to do was see how, this is in New Orleans, see how high I could hold a flame above the wick of a candle and ignite the wick. All right. And so I was holding the flame like millimeters above. And at a certain point, I'm bringing the flame in and it's like 5 inches above the wick, and suddenly the wick ignites. And I'm like, what happened there? And so I started trying to redo the experiment. And eventually I realized that the wisp of smoke, which is really wax vapor, is flammable. And when you put a flame in it, a little ball of flame travels down the wisp, hits the wick, and ignites it, right? But this was my early exploration. And at the same time, here I am, I bonded with books. And the only books in my house at this point are a set of encyclopedias and the Bible. Well, the Bible was a lot more intimidating because it wasn't in modern English. Okay, so I went for the set of encyclopedias and I was like, okay, I'll just read them A to Z. Man, I get to E and I hit Albert Einstein and I hit the weirdness of relativity. And the thing about it is, the encyclopedia made it clear, this is real. This is not like Marvel Comics. And that to me was just like, you gotta be kidding. What? I had to know everything there was about relativity. So as we continued to move around, literally that year, I was 11 years old. I was 10 years old when I discovered it. At the end of the school year, because my birthday is in March, I was 11. All right. And when the next school year started, I ended up spending the next 16 months living in 9 different households and attending 5 different schools across 3 different states. And so there was like a gap in this scientific development, right? It was a lot of trauma again in that era. And so, when I came back, I was really more into knowledge than humans, right? And so my mother would, we finally settled down in Mississippi, and I tell my mother, oh, I wish I could get some books on Einstein. And she would work these shifts at the factory, right? 3 to 11, 11 to 7, and so we wouldn't see each other. But I'd come home from school, and she'd have like 3 relativity books she got from like the library in Heidelberg, Mississippi, the small little library, right? So that's kind of how it started for me. And then I had that identity at school, oh, he's the nerd, he's the smart guy, and it all fed together. And, they would call me Urkel, they would call me Professor, they would call me Einstein.
Wow. So did that sink in for you? Did you think about science as something that you wanted to learn more about or do as a career?
Man, the idea of a career, right? Coming from where I came from, the idea of a career isn't an idea that you actually have. Okay. Right. What you're doing is you're getting by, right? You're getting by. So, we had 2 factories. We had Howard Industries, made transformers where my mother worked. We had the wood plant, Masonite, right? They would lay off. And, and so like, for example, the entire time I was in high school, my sister and brother-in-law and daughter, they moved into the house with us because it was a recession. And so the only work available in our language, right? The language we use, the way we said it, was cleaning white folks' houses. All right. So that's what my sister Bridget did. My brother-in-law, Dwayne, he had a ruptured disc in his back. So he ended up unemployed. And, that was, we were barely making it. And so because my father had retired and I got a check because he had, it was the days of pension. He was a military war veteran, I received, and that's how my mother survived. Right. But we also grew food. We hunted, we fished. it wasn't a life where I was like, oh, I'd like to be an engineer or, but I knew certain things existed. So I used to go around saying, oh, I want to be a nuclear physicist, right? But I had no idea what that really meant. And so luckily, the world came and found me. So we were all ushered into the cafeteria, the 10th grade class, and the Armed Services Vocational Aptitude Battery Exam was administered to us. A few weeks later, I get called to the principal's office, and he introduces me to the Navy recruiter. And this guy tells me, hey man, if you go nuke, you did so, you killed this test, never seen anything like it. If you enlist, you go nuke, I give you $20,000. Now, that number, $20,000, was key to me because my brother-in-law, who had, achieved the glass ceiling of our community, a low-level manager at the plant, I remember hearing my mother brag that he had made $15,000 one year. So here the Navy recruiter is offering me $20K, right? And then tells me if after 2 years, if you re-enlist, we give you a $30,000 enlistment bonus and immediately promote you to an E5, right? So now let me tell you how the perspective worked where I came from. At my high school, we had a maintenance man who was elderly. He retired. This young cat who was sort of like, early 20s dude, who was sort of like part-time help, ends up getting a full-time job. You know what we all had to say about that? He got it made, right? Achieving maintenance man at the high school was the equivalent of you got it made in life. You're set for life. So now this dude is offering me E5 in the military and $30K bonus, $20K a year. It's a no-brainer. This recruiter went above and beyond. I signed up while I was still in high school. So I was required to go and spend time at the Navy recruiting station, and we would talk a lot. And he was like, man, I'm going to get you in the Navy Academy. He had never done it, and so we missed deadlines or something. But he's like, I'm going to find something for you. And by the way, he did take me to get the nuclear test, and I aced that. And so then he was like, I found this program for you called BOOST, which stands for Broadened Opportunity for Officer Selection and Training. It's for people just like you. People from rural America, people from the inner cities, people where we know the education isn't as good as in other places. So we're going to take you in, put you in this program run by the Marines, and give you a year of hardcore academic training. So there were 2 math classes at Boost, the regular CAT class and the remedial class. Guess which one I was in? I was in the remedial class. Why? Let me give you an indication. So at my high school, Heidelberg High School, you had Heidelberg High School, all black, except for the one guy who transferred in junior year, James Roberts, the one white dude at our school. Mile and a half down the road, you have Heidelberg Academy, the private all-white school. Same situation, opposite side of the county. When Mississippi evaluated all of its schools in the early 2000s, every school was given a rating, 1 to 5, just like we have A, B, C, D, F. 4 schools in the state were given an F. 2 of them were my middle school and my high school. So to say I was undereducated, when I took things like the ACT test, remember, I'm an avid reader. I'm devouring everything I can find. I'm blasting it except for mathematics. Who's going to teach me mathematics? Right? And so knowing the landscape the way I do now, God bless teachers, but, most math teachers have never been scientists or mathematicians, right? Or anything like that. So if you don't know the goal that you're teaching to and have a broader understanding of it, shaping it, what really matters in what we do for the student, so what you end up doing is believing that math is all about numbers, right? And you know everything about numbers, but beyond that, there's not much you can do.
Yeah, and so with all of that going on, how in the world did you win and we can get back to all this later, but how in the world did you win a computer programming science fair with a project about relativity amidst all of that?
Yeah, so right. So I discovered Einstein and relativity at the age of 10, become obsessed. I'm doing everything I can to understand relativity. All right, at a certain point, I realized I got to understand the mathematics of it. So, that is simple math. People think it's not, right? But special relativity, Lorentz contractions, all that stuff, it's really simple, okay? And I was able to figure it out, even though I really didn't understand even algebra, right? I was able to take the arguments and, and figure it out. But then, some professors at the nearby university in Hattiesburg, Mississippi, decided to do outreach and come to our school. And they told us about something that we had never heard of before, science fairs, okay? And they said, you guys should participate. And so it turns out that my girlfriend, so in Mississippi, we don't date back then. You didn't date. You did what was called courting. And the way that works is on a Sunday, the boy goes to the girl's house. You sit at opposite ends of the couch with the family watching you, right? Then you do that for about 3 hours, go home. You might eat, maybe not, right? But so, she ends up getting a little Radio Shack TRS-80 for Christmas. So I'm like, why am I sitting on the couch with you? I know, this everybody's talking about this computer thing. So I go over there, and it came with a little book that taught you the basic programming language. And so, I'm writing do loops and things, and then, these USM professors show up, and they're like, you have to do a science fair project. And I'm just like, oh, okay. What do I do? Oh, I'll program relativity. Not knowing, I had no idea. I had never heard of modeling or, it's just like, okay, it's equations. Computers solve math problems. If I can make it graphical in any way, then I'm really rolling, right? So, that's what I did. And so the first year, but we didn't know anything about trifold boards and all that. So the first year, a bunch of us went to, we had our school science fair, which I won. And we had, my mini-me, my buddy Andrew McGee, who passed. All my high school buddies are passing away, man. One guy in the book, he just passed away December. The guy I'm talking about right now, Andrew McGee, he passed away early 2020, both heart attacks. And, the story of the science fair in my book, I'm the only remaining survivor, okay? But what happens is, we go there that first year and we realize that there is a visual component to these science fair projects. And ours, they look like crap. Like we had no idea. All you know is we're supposed to have 3 boards, like, handwritten, torn out spiral notebook paper. It was, so I go there, but I end up getting an honorable mention. All right. I end up getting an honorable mention. We go back the next year. I come in first place. I signed up. I was originally in computer science. And the computer science judge was like, dude, we have no idea what you're talking about. We're moving you to physics. So I go to physics and I come in first place. My buddy Andrew McGee, he took a piece of car radiator, put it into a box, put glass panels on it, painted it black, put a heat lamp under it. You fed in cold water, hot water came out. He came in second in engineering. And then the third guy was named Aristotle Bender. He came in third place in his field. I don't know what it was. So the 3 of us ended up going to the state science fair, right? And then I came in second place at the regional science fair. Because remember, I was originally computer science and moved over. And then there was this story in the book. Man, it was the craziest thing. The second year, we knew we had to have like real wood with hinges and all this, okay? And we had to have color. So we had this plan where those of us who had done it the year before went to the town of Hattiesburg the night before. Our big boards would come on the school bus the next day with everyone else. And my boards were left behind. All right, I guess I'm out. Right? And this kid who was doing it for the first time, who had cardboard boards, he was like, no, you're not out. You're taking my board. And I'm trying to resist. He's like, no, dude, you're taking it. So I take it. And so I'm outside, I'm late. It's like literally cardboard held together with Scotch tape. And I'm trying to tape my, parts on it, and it's windy. And they're just flying all over the place. And this is a crazy story, man, but 100% true. And there's this family, a husband and wife who are both teachers with their kids and their, school kids. And they're having sandwiches and stuff before we get started, right? And they see this, so the kids start helping me grab my papers, and it becomes a little thing, right? Finally, we get it all together. And it's laying there on the grass, and we all stand up and was like, yes, man. At that very moment, this huge gust of wind comes along, rips the whole thing up, lifts it off the ground, and just tears it apart, right? It is toast, right? So I'm like, it's fate. I'm not competing today. one of the guys who had actual wooden boards with hinges, he was like, no, man, you're taking my board. And I'm like, no. And he's like, yeah, you are. You're our dude. You're taking my board. And I took his board, but at this point, my pages are all beat up, right? So I end up coming in second place in physics because, again, my infrastructure was much better, but my content, was very beat up looking. So I go to state and I end up winning first place because now I'm all together. Everything's together. Man, my life, had so many crazy challenges because in some ways I was a child unprotected in the world. And so there are so many people that are looking to take advantage of a kid in various ways. And, I was super, able to like, duck and dodge and escape. But, you still got to go through that experience,
What I know about your story at this point, which is that you had a lot of innate knowledge and drive and you kept going, but also there were so many people who helped you along the way. Like you had people push you who looked at you over and over and said, you can do this, keep going.
But understand this, man, humans have innate, right? You look at my situation, look at the person who's walking through a desert, with their kid in tow for weeks at a time, right? The human will to survive, the human will, the human ability to create and think and innovate, we're all super dope, right? We all are, we all have it. As an educator, being sufficiently advanced that I've had many perspectives, seen it in many geographical areas, all around the world, been in the federal government doing it. I have my own ideas about education and developing human beings and how to get the best out of each other, and one of the things that are done incredibly terribly, we call it gatekeeping, who you let in. And that's what determines, who gets to do it. For Americans, it's a shame because we're so well positioned as a nation. I've been to 41 countries. All right. So I see my country in the context of the countries of Earth. I don't know if that's a representative sample, maybe it is, but I see a well-organized, incredibly rich nation that if people bond together to do things, they can make it happen. There's nothing that we can't do.
Right. Well, so when you're in grad school, you get to Stanford and you're recognizing this, I would imagine the way you described it, there's a lot of you recognizing the haves and have-nots in a new way for you. Right. And somebody sits you down, one of your professors, and says, look, you can do these problems. You're going to get there. How does that influence how you think about education today?
Here's the thing. What any particular person needs in a particular moment. So what that was really is something that I've seen in my career that I later, in retrospect, you're like, here's what's happening. But people who you see who successfully navigated the pathway, if you come from not the standard circumstances where they expect, where it's just like plug and go, right? Like my son will be, right? Like I'll give you an example. My son, my mom said when he was like 4 or 5, I think he's smarter than you are. And I was like, no, the hell he ain't. His dad got a Ph.D. in physics. Neither one of my parents graduated high school, right? The conversation in my house is very different, right? So, today, he's in AP physics, AP calculus, it's not, he'll be plug and go, right? He's ready. He's educated, right? And people talk about being smart. Okay, so here's the thing. One thing I looked at when I got to Stanford. So this is the first time I was introduced to class. I had grown up in the Deep South, so I thought America's division was race, right? I get to Stanford, people don't care your race. But hey, man, the way you speak, the clothes you wear, the thoughts you have, it was a class division, okay? But here's what I noticed. I looked around to people around me and I was like, you guys aren't intrinsically smarter than the people I knew in South Central LA, Houston's 3rd Ward in South Park, New Orleans 9th Ward, New Orleans East and in the Mississippi. And you're damn sure not harder working, right? All these people who think poor people aren't working hard, go to any poor community in the morning and watch and look at a bus stop and see what you see, right? I've been in that bus stop in the dark, right? And so it seemed an injustice to me, right? And so I felt like I had discovered something oh my God, did you know that, there's gold in the city of gold? And that gold was education, right? I realized that the way we thought about education, since none of us had actually done it, you create a story, right? You don't know anything unless you actually have done it. And that's one of the other big lessons I learned as being a graduate student, what it means to actually know something. So, you're talking about some country, Iran. You ever been to Iran? No, you know nothing about Iran. I don't care what you watched, right? You got to go to actually know. The summer before I went to Stanford, I did my very first physics research in my life. I went to UC Berkeley, all right? And I worked at the Center for Particle Astrophysics with Bernard Satterley. I met Saul Perlmutter. He was a postdoc, one of the two postdocs. I forget the other guy. And they were really good to me, man. Berkeley, they treated me really, really well, okay? And the interesting thing was that I applied to Berkeley to grad school and had been denied. And at the end of the summer, they were like, yo, man, if you want to come to Berkeley, we'll make a spot for you. And now get this. I did not know that Stanford was this highfalutin university. I didn't know that. Where I came from, there's 3 universities that are the top universities in the world. Harvard, MIT, Georgia Tech. After that, you're looking at sports, right? LSU, right? Ole Miss, right? Or, like me, a historically black college. So, the thing was, when I started getting acceptance letters, Stanford offered me $14,500 or $14,760, something like that. My next highest offer for my graduate stipend was like $11,500. So you win, Stanford, right? And I also knew that they had graduated 30 black PhDs in physics. So it seemed like, okay, I'll be safe if I go there. Because I was, I felt like at that time in my life, the story I was living in Mississippi was, you're an oppressed minority. These people are, treat you this way, right? Now, don't get me wrong. I had peers, white dudes that I knew because, I was participating in extracurricular activities, right? Even though I was at an all-black high school. Now, white girls and black guys, we pretended the other did not exist, right? For our safety. But white dudes, there were some that just loved me, and of course there were haters, but it's the same way with black dudes, right? Some love me, some are haters, right? So I had anti-evidence that not all white people are racist, right? But the time I left Mississippi going up to Stanford, that's what I thought. And I remember having this discussion with my mother on the phone, and she mentioned something about racism. The conversation was about the difficulty trying to make it, and she said something about racism or whatever. And I was like, oh, no, Mom. Being white ain't even good enough here. You gotta, it's not about that. That's not what it's about, right? It was a class thing. And for me, it was about being undereducated. But I went in there thinking I might be undereducated, but I can outwork all y'all, all right? And I felt that about anybody on earth. You know what I'm saying? I was in the military. I got tested. You know what I'm saying? I was doing stuff. So, throughout my life, that was challenging. And, my will was I will not fold. Some people need encouragement. Some people need to be challenged. Some people need to be told, you ain't the one. Because for me, when you told me you ain't the one, what thought popped in my head? Oh, I ain't? I'll show you. Right? I'm more of do than talk. Okay. So, but the thing about it was what I didn't know was that I couldn't do it alone. Okay. Mathematics, physics, they're very subtle. Okay. And luckily, Stanford had this program where the physics department, they brought in 1 or 2 students every year in the graduate school of physics who weren't as well prepared, but appeared to be very talented. All right. And so they set up different mechanisms for supporting those students. And one mechanism was to hire a tutor for the summer before you took the qualifying exam. And so I had these 2 dudes. I had David Santiago, who is now, I think, the chief scientist at the Quantum Computing Center at Berkeley. And then this other cat from India, Rakesh Nigam. All right. And man, Rakesh especially. Rakesh was a nerd's nerd. And Rakesh told me, look, here's what we're going to do, Hakeem. We're going to meet every night, 7 days a week. And we're going to do this. I'm like, all right, Rakesh, let's do it. And Rakesh taught me how to read physics, how to actually take a book and read every single word and letter and equate, before that, I'm highlighting the equations, I didn't really, and so I'll also understand this, you're learning a very different language. I don't know what it is culturally, but you know how like African Americans and Caribbean Americans have gotten in the 20th century making the music that spread around the world, and dominated the world in the form of R&B and then hip hop and all this kind of stuff. So it seems like culturally, when it comes to the use of language and things like that, sometimes, the flow isn't in equal directions. The language of intellectuals went from Greek to Latin to English, in part had to do with the fact of each language being more efficient than the next language. All right. For example, English doesn't have a lot of gendered nouns, right? So the other piece of information is one thing about Black vernacular English in comparison to standard American English and British English is it's far more efficient. So what does that mean? It's tomorrow's language of the intellectuals. Mic drop. All right. So because you see the slang, it does flow, right? You look at our, physicists and astronomers talking on Twitter, you would swear, they're using the slang of the Black community of a decade ago, right? 5 years ago, right? So.
Okay. I can understand that. I feel like my tweets are probably 5 or 10 years behind. I'll admit to that.
That's one of the things they used to tell us growing up all the time. They're like, hey, you want to know what the white folks in America are going to be listening to 5 years from now? Just listen to what African Americans are doing. Don't know what dances they're going to be doing. But you know what else I noticed? Traveling. The first place I traveled out of the country to the other hemisphere was the International School of Space Sciences in Italy in 1997 in L'Aquila, Italy. And, the way the Italians were dressing at that time, I was like, whoa. That's a little risque in comparison to how we dress in America. 5 years later in America, the exact same thing. Go to Japan one year. Everybody has a phone and they're looking at it. And I'm like, what are they doing? I think it was like 2007, 2008. I'm like, what are they doing? What could you possibly be doing looking at your phone like that so much? I just didn't get it. 4 years later in America, same thing. Everybody's doing the same thing, right? So culturally, things go in different directions. And basically what I'm saying is nerd culture and nerd language is so like unnatural, and then the universe is deceptive. And so physics thinking is not intuitive, right? Your intuition is going to lead you wrong. The answer to everything is hard work, right? Being enmeshed, hard work, and forget about the humans, focus. And so that's what I was able to do. I was able to curate my humans. I had Rakesh, I had David, I had Art Walker, I had Art Walker's group. There was noise, of course, right? And then, a lot of the stuff I did is I wanted to undo the injustice. So I was like, running all these different programs or participating in them that we call outreach type stuff, right? Both on campus and off campus. So that's what drove me.
Well, okay. So you're talking about the language of physics and the language of intellectuals. Now, so a couple of weeks ago, I was looking at your tweets before we talked. And a couple of weeks ago, you wrote something to the effect of Albert Einstein, he is still so dope.
Oh, man.
So how does that stuff, we're talking at least 100 years on, for a lot of his work, right?
Yeah.
What's making that stand up for you?
Man, so my buddy, David Santiago, he's always, Hakeem, man, you got to do, he's always chastising. Here's what you got to do, man. If you really want to do, you really do, man. And he tells me, he's all like, man, you got to go read the original papers. The stuff that they're doing now, is diluted, go back and see how they thought. And that is the key thing, their logic. Oh, man. And Einstein's logic and his papers and his books. I'm just like, dude, why am I hearing this for the first time? This is so dope. I've never heard anybody say, I've never seen it in the book. Why don't we just take Einstein and, And yeah, man. It's just the way they thought through things logically.
So your book, A Quantum Life, culminates, ends with you getting your Ph.D. Right.
Yeah.
What are the highlights of what comes after the book? Volume 2.
Yeah, man. So basically the book is the story of James Plummer Jr., all right, which is the name I was born with. And then I felt like I had transformed as a person, and I wanted to honor my heritage. Now, that got complicated too. The thing about James Plummer Jr. is that quite often, he didn't have a lot of choices, right? The choices were about survival. And Hakeem Oluseyi, speaking of myself in third person, sorry about that, I also speak of humans that way, right? But I have agency. I've had the ability to influence and things like that. So a big part of what I've been doing is, I discovered this. I didn't want to be. I didn't think to myself, yes, I'm going to be an educator or I'm going to motivate people. Thoughts like that never occurred to me. I never set out to be the educator, but I was teaching at a junior college while working at Foothill College while working in Silicon Valley, and students would come back to me after they'd taken my class and they'd say, oh man, I didn't realize science was cool. I didn't realize I could get it and understand it. Your hunger and curiosity, that's what's going to drive you to continue.
Well, I really appreciate your time. I think we'll let you go, but I really enjoyed your book, A Quantum Life, My Unlikely Journey from the Streets to the Stars. And this time with you, thanks for chatting.
Thank you for having me.
So that was my conversation with Dr. Hakeem Oluseyi. Please like and subscribe so you don't miss our next episode. I'm Chris Gorski. Thanks for listening.